We got a super exciting race coming in 2023. We kind of touched on those headlines already. Obviously, the main headline is that 2-up battle, Vingegaard versus Pogačar. We also got Ineos in the equation, ever strong. And then another big headline we haven't touched on yet, Mark Cavendish going for a record-setting, I believe, 35th stage win. What are we going to be talking about come July?
Well, Ineos, ever strong. Are they ever strong this year? 2023 Tour de France. Mate, they haven't got anyone this year. They haven't. Ineos is a team that's always been, up until a few years ago, winning Tour de France's. They won Tour de France after Tour de France. It started with Bradley Wiggins. It went into Chris Froome. It went into Geraint Thomas. Went back to Chris Froome. Went to Egan Bernal. They win Tour de France's. That's what this team is about. They haven't got a guy, in my opinion, who's even going to be on the podium this year at the Tour de France. So I don't know, but I think Ineos is a less exciting team for the 2023 Tour de France. I think that there's a very exciting battle for the podium spot. I think that, like we said, those two guys that we've been talking about, that they're the two favourites, and they're going to be first and second, barring disaster. First and second between those two. Third place, I don't know who it's going to be yet. I've got a few ideas. I think that we saw a guy in Tour of Switzerland, Felix Gall. No one's been talking about him. He absolutely destroyed the guys today. I think there's Richard Carapaz. We don't know who's coming on. Jai Hindley. He won the Giro d'Italia last year. Bora Hansgrohe. Been very, very understated. No one thinks about him, but he was in good form at Dauphiné. Ineos? Tell me one guy in Ineos who you think is going to finish on the podium. I don't think so.
It's true. It's a different storyline than coming in last year. I felt like they were sort of the third place sleeper team with some options actually, and a super deep team. And we're not seeing as deep of a team this year. What do you think about someone we saw feature heavily in Unchained, one of the French favorites, David Gaudu? Do you think he's up for it? Do you think he's able to take that next progression? We actually heard him proclaim and say, like, the dream is to win the Tour. He was really close to that podium last year. Can he channel some of that French love on home soil?
Well, they certainly back him. Groupama France Tadej certainly back him, and we just saw yesterday in the media that they've made it public that Arnaud Démare, their sprinter, who's in fine form at the moment, he won in Brussels Cycling Classic last week. He was very close in the first stage of Tour of Switzerland. He's not going to the Tour de France, and he typically is always there. And he's French. He's the French sprinter. He's been the French sprinter for a number of years. They've said, you're not going to the Tour de France because we're backing David Gaudu. As it turns out, David Gaudu is the one who's spoken to Marc Madio, who is the general manager, the boss, the guy who's calling the shots at Groupama France Tadej. He said, I don't want Démare there. I want to go for GC, and I don't want Démare there. So that dynamic in that team is there's a lot of friction there. He's made the call, Marc Madio, the boss, he's made the call. He said, okay, we'll back you. So there's a lot of pressure from the team, a lot of pressure from the French public. And that's what is the hardest thing to do as a Frenchman who's trying to win or finish on the podium at the Tour de France, to deal with the pressure of the whole nation. Everybody's on the side of the road. It's the July holidays. They're all on the side of the road cheering for Gaudu. Come on. They're all watching, millions of people watching TV in France cheering for him. A lot of pressure to deal with. Certainly has the physical capabilities, but that's going to be one thing that he's going to have to overcome.
Yeah, we saw that. That was highlighted well in Unchained as well, that pressure with when they talked to Thibaut Pinot about his history and especially Tour de France. I mean, you could have played word bingo with the word pressure when he was talking, because it was he used the word pressure, more than any other rider I think featured in the series. So that's definitely a real factor in terms of the French and Gaudu's run for the podium there. Speaking of pressure, what do you think about the teams? You have an insight into the Tour de Suisse right now, and this kind of race within the race of team selection. How many of these teams, at this point in June, are, a couple weeks out from the Tour de France, have their roster totally dialed? And how many of the riders on these squads are actually feeling that pressure just to make it into this conversation, into the race of the year?
There's a lot. I think most teams are all in the same boat. I think all teams probably have, there's going to be 8 riders on the start line at the Tour de France. Every single team has between 26 and 30 riders in their squad. And only 8 of them can be there. Most teams have a pretty good idea of, let's say, 5 or 6 riders, and the other riders in the team know that those 5 or 6 riders are going to go to the Tour de France. And then you shorten the team down from 26 to 36 riders to normally 12 riders at this point. So you have a long list of 12 riders. 6 are going, and the riders know that, or 7 or 8 are going. And then there's sort of like 6 guys fighting for the last 4 spots. And I think that's how it is in all teams. And it's a very, very difficult situation to manage, because when you're at the Tour de Suisse, or when you're in Dauphiné last week, or other races that are going on at this time, you're trying to get the best out of the riders in the race that they're currently in. And you might have a leader and say, okay, we're trying to support this guy. But at the same time, you know that guy that you're asking to play a support role is trying to make the Tour de France team. So it's quite a difficult dynamic to manage. You need to give that guy opportunities to prove himself that he's ready for the Tour de France. And you need to but you also need to push him to support the leader in that current race. And it's a very, very interesting dynamic.
I don't miss those days as a rider in June, fighting your teammates and your mates for a spot in the Tour de France. What do you think, Sam? So I think the last thing we got to touch on, does Cav break the record? I mean, I think if anyone is capable of doing it, it's game time, showtime Cav, that has repeatedly, especially in the past couple of years, defied the odds. But do you think he can, especially with his team and the resources that he has at his disposal there?
Well, if you asked me 3 months ago, is Cav going to break the record? I'd say absolutely not. I don't think he's capable of doing it in that team. Since that conversation's happened, he's won a stage of the Giro d'Italia, the last stage of the Giro d'Italia. So he's got through 3 weeks of hard racing, and he's won the last stage of the Giro d'Italia. So if you were to ask me now, is Cav going to break the record? I'd say absolutely not. He's not going to break it. I just can't see it happening. There's too many fast guys. There's no standout sprinter going into this year's Tour de France, which makes things really, really interesting. There hasn't been a prolific winner all year amongst the sprinters in the world.
There's a lot.
But they've all won somewhere. They've all won somewhere, and Cav's one of them. He's won somewhere. But the thing that Cav's missing is he hasn't got a lead out. He hasn't got a team around him, and he won most of his stages throughout his career, coming off the back of like world-class lead outs. World class. He doesn't have that in Astana. He just doesn't have that. And you need it at the Tour de France. The Giro d'Italia, yeah, you can kind of find your way through. He also had some help from an old friend, Geraint Thomas, from Ineos, who gave him a little bit of a hand there in that last stage. He's not going to get that at the Tour de France. So I think that without the lead out that he needs, I just can't see it happening.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have said it 3 years ago. Wouldn't have said it 3 months ago. I probably wouldn't even have said it, 4 weeks ago. But I think he's going to do it. I think he's going to make it happen. But we'll see. We'll see come July.